I'm here today with Professor David Calleo. Thank you, Professor Calleo, for being with the Bologna Admissions blog.
Very happy to be part of the Bologna Admissions blog.
Well, it's
for SAIS.
There'll be an introduction in the text part of this interview where I'll point out that you've been with with SAIS for more than 4 decades. You've been the director of the European Studies program for that long, and you're currently the Dean Acheson Professor. So you know what you talk about, and I just thought we'd talk a little bit today about SAIS Bologna and about the European Studies program. And my first question would be then, if you could, it's a fairly big question, or complicated one, but what sort of changes have you seen overall at SAIS Bologna and SAIS since you've been involved?
Things change, of course, all the time. Certain fundamental things don't change. I mean, I think Bologna has been an extremely important part of SAIS from the very beginning. One change, which I think is very much for the better, is that European students or non-American students at Bologna, now almost all of them come to Washington for a second year. And that seems to me a much sounder education. It's certainly a huge contribution to SAIS Washington. Some of our best students come that way. And it also makes us a much more diverse and interesting place than we would be if without this big input from of non-Americans from Bologna. And of course the experience of spending a year in Bologna does quite a lot for the Americans as well, so that we have a rather more knowledgeable and sophisticated group of students here, thanks to the fact that they've spent a year at Bologna.
Say a word maybe about the European Studies program itself. Obviously, there have been momentous events since the late 60s in Europe, needless to say, and we're not going to summarize those in a brief blog post. But how has the program itself changed, or has it remained fairly similar in what it attempts to do?
Well, I mean, the substance, of course, has changed enormously. Europe, in many ways, is among more active parts of the world. I mean, and this great experiment in powerful nation states sort of learning to live with each other has done a great deal for Europe, but it also is as a kind of model for the rest of the world is extremely interesting. The program itself, we've always been very interdisciplinary. We emphasize history and also economics, so that we really do put together a SAIS education in a way which I think is quite pleasing and quite useful, in the sense that we mix economics and history. We try really to be interdisciplinary, and we've got some wonderful material to work with, in the sense that the European states are very diverse, and they're very much like America in some respects and very different in others, which is itself quite stimulating.
The Bologna Center was created 56 years ago, more or less in the wake of World War II. During the Cold War, transatlantic relations obviously were uppermost in the minds of those who formed it. But do you think that European studies as a geographic area of study remains relevant currently?
Yeah, in some respects it's more relevant than ever. I mean, we're moving into a world which is much more balanced than it was during the Cold War, much more plural, as everybody says. Europe, in a sense, is used to living this way. I mean, Europe is several major states, it's major civilizations, very powerful governments and economies, and they spent most of their history tearing each other to pieces. It's a remarkable thing that they've somehow learned to create structures which focus them on what are their common interests, how can they live together, how can they deal with problems before they become unmanageable. And they've also developed modern societies, a welfare state, it's a great laboratory for all of these things because each country is different. So I think all that is for an American is extremely useful to study because it gives you a tremendous variety of things to be sensitive to, which means I think often the people who come out of European studies are sometimes rather good at dealing with other parts of the world because they somehow have been sensitized to the importance of differences and also the importance of similarities, which is a particular. I mean, obviously, there are lots of other interesting regions in the world, and they have some of the same features. But Europe certainly has a kind of richness which remains very relevant. It seems to me. It's also a model in that sense because the rest of the world is increasingly plural. There's no dominant state, even in regions. There often are not dominant states, and this structure of the European Union that's grown up over the last 40 or 50 years is very promising for the future, it seems to me, for the rest of the world.
Last question, I'll let you get back to your work. Do you think the Eurozone will survive its current difficulties?
I think so. I mean, if it's true there are all these problems. I don't say I'm surprised, but I'm impressed in a way underneath all the hullabaloo, how much progress has been made on things which a few years ago people thought were utterly impossible. For example, trying to harmonize fiscal policies and so on. It's sort of been happening all the time, people saying it's not happening. I mean, Europe also tends to function that way. It advances through crises. It's always on the verge of collapse, everybody says wisely, but in fact it's very strong, and it does quite remarkable things.
But there aren't the same quality of leaders that there were, say, 40 years ago, are there?
No, but sometimes people look better in retrospect as well as worse in retrospect. I mean, it's one of the advantages of studying history. You're not too surprised by anything.
Great. Well, listen, thank you very much, and have a good day.
Nice to see you.